You know, we all do it. We throw stuff out, and it just disappears, right? But what if that whole system, the one we totally take for granted, has a secret ticking clock? Today, we're going to dig into a potential garbage crisis that's brewing in Ontario, and believe me, it is a lot closer than you probably think.
So if you look at the official reports, they'll tell you that this is the year, 2037. That's when Ontario's landfills are projected to be completely full. I mean, that seems pretty far off, doesn't it? Kind of feels like a problem for another day, another decade.
But what if it's not? What if there's one single point of failure that could just shave years off that deadline? Something that could catch an entire province completely off guard.
Well, this is the actual deadline. If one very crucial relationship changes, all of a sudden, a problem that felt like it was a decade and a half away is now just a 10-year problem. So what's causing this 3-year cliff?
The answer, it turns out, is across the border. Every single year, Ontario quietly exports over a quarter of all its waste. And without that release valve, the entire system just backs up, fast. And we're not talking about a small amount here. We're talking about nearly 3.5 million tons of garbage, trucked right out of the province every single year, and the vast majority of it, it ends up in one specific U.S. state. And for a really, really simple reason.
It all comes down to money. There's this incredibly powerful economic incentive that's just pulling all this waste south, and you can literally measure it in pennies.
Okay, get this. To dump a ton of trash in Michigan, the state charges what's called a tipping fee of just 36 cents. 36 cents. Now, let's compare that to its neighbors. Ohio, they charge over $4. Wisconsin can be up to 13 bucks. It's an absolutely unbelievable bargain that makes it cheaper for Ontario waste companies to drive hundreds of kilometers than to just dump it at home. And this isn't some accident or oversight. Michigan's governor actually tried to raise that fee to $5 to stop the state from being, a trash destination. But in October of 2025, that proposal was shot down. So politics has basically locked this economic incentive firmly in place.
You see, local business groups fought back hard. They argued that because federal law doesn't let them charge different rates for in-state versus out-of-state waste, a so-called trash tax aimed at Ontario would hit Michigan businesses just as hard. And you know what? Their argument won. For now, that border is wide open for business.
And this brings us right back to the central problem. Ontario's entire waste strategy is basically balanced on this one kind of fragile cross-border relationship. And it's creating two very, very different futures.
The path forward is pretty clear. If those 3.44 million tons keep flowing south to Michigan, we hit the wall in 2037. But, and this is the big gut, if that border closes for any reason, all that trash comes flooding right back home, and our landfill capacity just evaporates 3 years sooner, in 2034.
So Michigan's low fees are keeping the border economically open, sure, but there's a much bigger, much more immediate threat looming on the horizon. A geopolitical tripwire, and it's set for July 1st, 2026.
Okay, right now, Ontario's trash is protected. It's shielded by a key legal term in the big trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, the USMCA. Because the trash is wholly obtained in Canada, it's considered an originating good. Just think of it like a diplomatic shield that makes it exempt from the kind of tariffs you'd see on other products.
But that shield could just vanish. The whole USMCA deal is up for a mandatory review on July 1st, 2026. And if, during these renegotiations, that originating goods status for waste gets revoked, that protection disappears overnight. Suddenly, trash isn't just trash anymore. It's a taxable good, and that means it's subject to federal tariffs. And we're not talking about a small tariff. The one that would likely get slapped on is a big one. It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA tariff, and it's currently set at 35%. Slapping a 35% tax on waste disposal contracts would make exporting to Michigan financially impossible. It would effectively slam the border shut.
So what happens then? What happens when 3.44 million tons of garbage suddenly have to make a U-turn at the border every year? Let's just say the domestic system is not ready for that kind of shock.
This chart here really shows you how vulnerable Ontario's system is. Over half of the province's remaining landfill capacity, 50.5%, is in private hands. And these are the very same companies who are most incentivized to use those cheap Michigan landfills instead of their own finite domestic space.
And it gets worse. The province's capacity is super concentrated. A staggering 57% of all the remaining space is held by just 7 landfills. 7! This means the entire provincial system is dangerously reliant on just a handful of sites. If even one of them has an issue, the ripple effects are enormous because there's just no widespread network to absorb a sudden crisis.
So the impact isn't just about finding space. It's about a sudden, massive shock to the system. Experts are calling it a financial and logistical cliff, a sudden drop-off where the costs for waste disposal just skyrocket and years of careful planning by cities just goes right out the window.
And the fallout would be immediate, and it would be expensive. For a city like Toronto, a border closure means tens of millions in new, totally unexpected costs every single year. It would force them to radically accelerate huge infrastructure projects years ahead of schedule, creating this sudden spike in debt that current budgets are simply not prepared for.
The reality is, Ontario is living on borrowed time and, well, borrowed land. That 2037 deadline, it's kind of an illusion. It's totally dependent on favorable economics and stable politics, with the real deadline of 2034 looking more and more likely, and a big trade showdown just around the corner. The race is on. Is there enough time to build the resilience needed to avoid falling right off the cliff?